Sheng, a descendant of Confucius, had sought refuge with a friend who was serving as a county magistrate. Hereafter, we'll refer to him as Sheng for short. Unfortunately, his friend passed away, leaving Sheng in a dire situation, with no place to go and no way to earn a living. His fate seemed sealed. He took shelter in a temple, where he transcribed Buddhist scriptures to pay for his room and board. By chance, Sheng met a young nobleman, and they hit off immediately. The nobleman's home was adorned with ancient books and paintings, with a collection of rare volumes from the Western stream sitting on his desk. The nobleman, sympathizing with Sheng's plight, suggested that he teach and take on students to earn a living. He then became Sheng's student, learning ancient texts, poetry, and history, without the ambition of pursuing official status. The nobleman's refined character was revealed through his treatment of Sheng. One evening, as they drank wine together, the nobleman sent for a maid named Xiangnu to accompany them. Xiangnu was stunningly beautiful, with a voice like a nightingale and the skill to play the pipa expertly. Sheng's heart stirred, but the nobleman, seeing his reaction, promised that he would find another suitable match for Sheng, someone as beautiful, if not more so, than Xiangnu. This was a subtle hint to the reader that Xiangnu's beauty, while captivating, would soon be overshadowed by another. Not long after, Sheng developed a painful abscess on his chest, which began as small as a peach, but soon grew to the size of a bull. The pain was unbearable, and he could barely eat or drink. His condition worsened, and soon it became apparent that only a drastic intervention could save him. The nobleman, concerned for his friend, told him that his sister, Jiaonu, was a skilled healer. At only 13 or 14, Jiaonu was as graceful as a willow tree, exuding intelligence and charm. Her arrival was marked by a delicate and refreshing fragrance, like orchids, and when she examined Sheng, she diagnosed his illness as one caused by unrequited love, frustration, and internal heat. Despite her youth, Jiaonu performed the surgery with remarkable skill. Her actions were precise, her movements fluid, as she expertly removed the abscess from Sheng's chest. The process, though a bit fantastical, had a dreamlike quality, as Jiaonu used a golden bracelet to extract the growth, and then applied a magical red pill to the wound. Sheng felt his pain dissolve as the cool, healing sensation spread through his body. The entire procedure was so expertly done that Sheng couldn't help but be amazed by Jiaonu's poise and talent. Though he was filled with admiration for Jiaonu, Sheng's feelings were complicated. His heart had been moved by Xiangnu, and now by Jiaonu, but he could never truly have her. Jiaonu's youth made her ineligible for marriage, and Sheng's feelings began to take a new turn. His admiration transformed into pure affection, the kind one might feel for a dear sister. Meanwhile, the nobleman, ever the friend and matchmaker, sought to console Sheng. He introduced Sheng to his cousin, Asong, a young woman of 18, whose beauty rivaled that of Jiaonu. Sheng, impressed by her charm, began to see her in a new light, and the nobleman arranged their marriage. However, Sheng's feelings for Jiaonu never faded. They remained friends, their bond growing stronger after he married Asong. But their relationship would soon face a test of fate. The nobleman confided in Sheng that his family was not human, but a family of fox spirits, and a terrible calamity loomed. If Sheng did not help, they would all perish. Though fearful, Sheng agreed to assist his friends. The calamity was swift and terrifying. A violent storm of thunder and lightning swept over the nobleman's home. In the midst of this turmoil, Sheng, ever brave, rushed to aid them, but the cost was his life. In his final moments, Jiaonu, using her extraordinary skill, revived him. She saved him with a red pill, and Sheng was brought back from the brink of death. After the storm, the survivors were relieved, but Jiaonu was deeply troubled. Her husband, Wulong, had perished in the storm. Jiaonu mourned deeply, her grief pouring out in tears. The story then comes full circle. Sheng's love for Jiaonu had turned into friendship, a bond forged through life and death. This was no ordinary friendship. It was one that defied the natural order, transcending the boundaries of life, death, and love. As Sheng's life continued, he later achieved success as a scholar and became an official. He returned to his homeland with his wife, Asong. However, in a turn of fate, he was dismissed from his post due to an incident involving an inspector. Upon meeting the nobleman again, Sheng learned that Jiaonu had married another, and this realization left him with a sense of profound loss. But their connection, though strained by time and circumstance, would never truly fade. The bond between Sheng and Jianu had been formed in the crucible of life and death, a connection that was more than friendship. It was a pact that transcended the realm of the living, the dead, and everything in between. In this eerie, haunting tale, we see the depths of loyalty, love, and the mysterious forces that govern life's most inexplicable connections. The fox spirit's legacy is one that weaves through Sheng's life like an unbroken thread, a presence both comforting and chilling that will never be forgotten.
Picture this, a fox, not just any fox though. This one's on a quest for immortality. Yeah, we're diving deep into the world of Chinese fox immortals today.
It's a fascinating topic.
It really is. We've got some incredible excerpts from a source that breaks down, well, pretty much everything about them.
Yeah.
Beliefs, hierarchies.
Oh, and even had these beliefs actually played out in Chinese society.
Exactly. There's so much to uncover. So to kick things off, let's talk about the evolution of these fox beliefs, because...
Well, they weren't always these powerful magical figures, were they?
Not exactly. If you look way back to early Chinese texts like the I Ching...
Right, or even the classic of mountains and seas.
Foxes were seen as kind of ominous figures.
Yeah.
Right, like they were harbingers of bad luck.
Yeah, almost like a warning sign that something bad was about to happen.
Definitely not the powerful mystical beings we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah.
So when did that shift happen? When did foxes get their magical makeover, so to speak?
Well, things started to change around the Tang Dynasty. That's when we start seeing stories of foxes shape-shifting. And some of the rituals they used are pretty wild.
Oh, I bet. Give us an example.
Okay, picture this. A fox placing a human skull on its head, bowing to the moon hundreds of times, and boom, transformation into a human.
Okay, that's a little creepy. But you've got to admit the imagery is pretty powerful. So let's get down to basics here. When we say fox immortal, what exactly do we mean?
At its core, the belief is that foxes can achieve immortality through Taoist practices.
Taoism being...
a Chinese philosophy and religion that emphasizes living in harmony with the Tao, which you could think of as like the natural order of the universe.
Got it. So it's not just about living a really, really long time. It's about tapping into a deeper spiritual level of existence.
Exactly. And through things like meditation, internal alchemy.
These foxes could potentially live for hundreds, even thousands of years.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it, but here's where it gets even more interesting. They're not just animals anymore. And they're not exactly gods either. They exist in this fascinating in-between space.
Okay, so not quite gods, but definitely not your average woodland creatures.
Yeah.
What kind of powers are we talking about here? What can these fox immortals actually do?
Well, they can shapeshift into human form, influence people's thoughts and emotions.
Wow.
Even grant wishes. It's a whole supernatural power set.
It sounds like it. And as with any good mystical system, I'm guessing there's a hierarchy to these fox immortals.
You guessed right. You've got your everyday foxes, just regular animals doing their foxy thing. Then you've got your demon foxes, and at the top, you have the celestial foxes.
Ooh, a hierarchy. I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this pecking order of powerful foxes. Who are these celestial foxes? What makes them so special?
The celestial foxes are the elite. They've achieved the highest level of cultivation.
And we often see them depicted as...
the golden nine-tailed fox in art and literature. It's a pretty striking image.
It is. So if we're picturing this nine-tailed fox bathed in golden light, we're talking top-tier fox immortality.
You got it.
It sounds like it takes a lot of work to reach that level.
It does. We're talking centuries of dedication to Taoist practices like meditation and internal alchemy.
And when we say internal alchemy, we're not talking about like brewing potions in a cauldron, right?
Not quite. It's more about refining your inner energy, like taking raw ore and transforming it into pure gold. But in this case, it's their spiritual energy they're refining.
That makes sense. So these celestial foxes are spending centuries honing their spiritual energy, striving for this ultimate state of enlightenment. But what about the not-so-enlightened foxes? What are the demon foxes all about?
Well, demon foxes still cultivate power, but they take a bit of a darker path. Instead of focusing on internal alchemy, they gain power by taking on human form. And well, let's just say they draw energy from human essence.
Okay, so not exactly the most ethical way to power up.
Definitely a shortcut, and probably one with some unpleasant side effects.
Makes sense. You mentioned that even ordinary foxes show up in these stories. What role do they play if they're not on this quest for immortality?
That's a good point. You're right. Not all foxes are aspiring to be immortals. In Pu Songling's Strange Stories from a Chinese Studio, which is one of our main sources for this deep dive, even regular non-magical foxes pop up.
It's like they're there to remind us that...
even in a world of powerful beings, everyday life goes on.
Exactly. So we've got these celestial foxes aiming for enlightenment, demon foxes taking a more hands-on approach to gaining power, and then our everyday foxes just doing their foxy thing. But even for those celestial foxes who are striving for good, it sounds like the path to immortality isn't exactly a walk in the park.
You're absolutely right. It's not all meditation and moonlight transformations. In Chinese folklore, there's this concept of divine punishment. And even those celestial foxes, the ones trying to do good, aren't immune to it.
Wait, so even if a fox is on the right path, they can still get struck by lightning. Why is that? You'd think the universe would be a little more supportive.
Well, the belief is that any being, regardless of their intentions, that accumulates a lot of power, can disrupt the natural order of things. And these celestial foxes, after centuries of cultivation, they're incredibly powerful.
So it's like the universe has to step in and course correct.
Exactly, just to keep things in balance.
So even good intentions can have cosmic consequences. It's like a reminder that power, even when used for good, has to be carefully managed.
Exactly. And the belief is that these challenges actually become more intense after a fox has lived for 500 years.
Really?
At that point, their shape-shifting abilities become stronger, but they're also more likely to face these divine trials.
So like a promotion with a really intense hazing ritual attached, you move up in the cosmic ranks, but suddenly you've got lightning bolts coming at you. How do these celestial foxes even survive?
That's where things get even more interesting. The stories tell us they need help. And not just from anyone. They need help from very specific humans. Successful officials.
Officials, like government bureaucrats, what could they possibly do to help a fox survive a cosmic lightning strike?
Well, in traditional Chinese society, officials were seen as having a special connection to the heavens.
I see.
They were viewed as being divinely protected, able to ward off evil and maintain order, so their presence, their support, could actually help shield a fox from these divine punishments.
So it's not like the officials are physically fighting off the lightning bolts. It's more about their symbolic power, their connection to a higher order that offers protection. But why would officials want to help these foxes in the first place? It seems like a risky move, so especially if the government isn't exactly pro-fox worship.
It is risky, but there's also a potential for reward. Remember, these celestial foxes have powers. They can grant favors, offer protection, even enhance someone's fortunes.
So there's something in it for them.
Right. It's a mutually beneficial relationship, a delicate dance between the human and the supernatural.
Okay, I'm loving this. We've got cosmic power plays, divine punishments, government officials making backroom deals with powerful foxes. This is better than any fantasy novel I've ever read.
Yeah.
But we've been focusing on the foxes themselves. What about the human side of things? How did everyday people view these fox immortals?
That's a great question, and it leads us to the really fascinating part. How these beliefs about fox immortals played out in Chinese society. Because here's the thing, while fox worship was hugely popular in folklore, it was never officially sanctioned by the government.
Wait, hold on. We've got to unpack that. We're diving into that fascinating dynamic between fox worship and the powers that be right after a quick break. Okay, so we're back. And I am still kind of mind blown by this whole fox worship was super popular, but the government wasn't exactly throwing fox-themed parades. It's a little bit of a contradiction.
Yeah, it really is. And it gets even more interesting when you compare it to Japan.
Right? Because
They've got this whole system called Inari faith, where fox deities are openly celebrated.
Yeah, they're associated with prosperity, good harvests, all that good stuff. And they have those incredible shrines dedicated to Inari with like thousands of red torii gates. It's just a whole different vibe. So why the different approach in China?
Well, during the Qing dynasty, the government got very specific about which deities could be publicly worshipped.
So like a religious crackdown.
In a way, it was all about control, really. By regulating religious practice, they could maintain social order and, of course, their own power.
So foxes didn't make the cut for the official pantheon of approved deities. But if people were already worshiping them, how do they enforce that? Do they, like, send out fox hunting squads to shut down all the shrines?
Not quite that dramatic, but it definitely put officials in a tough spot.
Because
they were tasked with upholding the law, but they couldn't exactly erase centuries of deeply ingrained folk beliefs. Imagine trying to tell people they can't believe in something that's been part of their culture for generations.
I can see how that would create some tension, especially for those officials who might have had their own personal beliefs about fox spirits. It seems like a recipe for some serious hypocrisy.
And there's evidence that some officials might have had their own fox altars set up discreetly.
So like a double life?
Exactly. Trying to balance their public duties with their private beliefs. Imagine an official presiding over a trial during the day, and then in the evening paying respects to a fox spirit in the hopes of securing a promotion or a favorable harvest.
Talk about hedging your bets.
Yeah.
It makes sense, though. If these officials really believed that foxes had genuine power, why wouldn't they try to get on their good side? That's like a supernatural insurance policy.
Exactly. It shows how deeply embedded these beliefs were, even among the elite who were supposed to discourage them. It makes you wonder about the line between official policy and actual practice, doesn't it?
It totally does. And it makes those stories about officials helping celestial foxes during their divine trials even more intriguing. It's like they were acknowledging the power of these beings, even if they couldn't do it openly. But what about everyday people? Why were they so drawn to fox worship in the first place?
Well, think about it. For people who didn't have a lot of power, especially those in rural communities who were at the mercy of the elements and often had to rely on luck for a good harvest, these fox spirits represented a way to potentially influence their fate.
So it's not just about worshiping them out of fear. It's about trying to secure their favor to get a little bit of help with life's challenges. It's like having a powerful, albeit slightly unpredictable ally in your corner.
And remember, these foxes weren't always depicted as purely benevolent beings. They could be mischievous, even vengeful at times.
Right.
So there was definitely an element of appeasement involved. It's like, hey, Mr. Fox Spirit, please don't ruin my crops or make my cows sick. Here's a nice offering for you.
It's like a supernatural protection racket, but with more incense and fewer threats of violence. But these foxes weren't just seen as forces of nature to be feared or placated. There was also a sense of admiration, even a little bit of envy, right?
Absolutely. Remember, these foxes were cunning, intelligent, and they could shapeshift, which made them all the more alluring. For people who felt stifled by social norms, especially those who existed outside the mainstream, these fox spirits were kind of aspirational figures.
So it wasn't just about fear or even respect. There was also this sense of, wow, I kind of wish I could be like that.
Exactly. You see this in the stories about foxes becoming patrons for performers and courtesans. These were professions that often pushed the boundaries of what was considered acceptable, that had a certain rebellious energy about them. And foxes, with their ability to shapeshift, to blend in, or stand out as they pleased, they embodied that same kind of freedom and fluidity.
It's like they represented a kind of liberation, a way to transcend the limitations of everyday life. And their stories often challenged social norms, poking fun at authority figures or turning expectations upside down. They weren't just mythical creatures. They were symbols of resistance, of pushing back against the established order.
And that's what makes them so enduring, isn't it? They speak to something deep within us, this desire to break free, to challenge conventions, to embrace our own power, even if it means bending the rules a little bit.
It makes you wonder what other hidden meanings might be encoded in these ancient stories, right? What other societal anxieties or aspirations might be reflected in the way these mythical creatures are portrayed?
That's a great point. And it's not just limited to fox spirits. Every culture has its own mythology, its own cast of supernatural characters. And each one of those characters can reveal something about the hopes and fears of the people who created those stories.
Okay, so we've explored the beliefs, the hierarchies, the social dynamics, the power plays, and even the subversive side of fox immortals. And you know what strikes me is that these creatures are far more complex than just cunning tricksters or even benevolent spirits.
They are. They're reflections of the human experience itself with all its contradictions and complexities. They embody our desires for power and immortality, our fears of the unknown, and our longing for something beyond the mundane.
They really make you think about the nature of belief, about the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of the world. And they remind us that even in a world that seems increasingly rational and scientific, there's still a place for magic, for wonder, for the possibility of something extraordinary.
Absolutely. And that's what makes exploring folklore so rewarding. It allows us to tap into that sense of wonder, to see the world through a different lens, and to connect with something larger than ourselves.
And on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive into the captivating world of Chinese fox immortals. But even though our deep dive is coming to a close, I have a feeling this conversation has only just scratched the surface.
There really is. It's like we've opened a door to a vast and intricate universe filled with stories and symbols that have resonated with people for centuries. And you know what's so fascinating is that these stories weren't just meant to entertain. They were also a way for people to make sense of the world around them, to grapple with big questions about life, death, and the nature of reality.
It's like each story is a puzzle piece. And when you start putting them together, you begin to see a bigger picture emerge. A picture of a culture, of a belief system, of a way of understanding the universe that's both familiar and utterly strange.
Exactly. And, you don't have to be an expert in Chinese history or philosophy to appreciate these stories. They speak to something universal, something that transcends cultural boundaries. They're about the power of belief, the allure of the unknown, the eternal struggle between good and evil, and the search for meaning in a world that can often feel chaotic and unpredictable.
It's like looking through a window into a different time and place, but also seeing reflections of our own hopes and fears staring back at us.
Yeah.
And it makes you realize that these stories, these myths, they weren't just created out of thin air. They were shaped by real-life experiences, by social structures, by the challenges and triumphs of everyday life.
And they continue to evolve, too. Think about how these themes of shapeshifting immortality and supernatural power show up in modern fantasy novels, movies, and video games. It's like these ancient stories are being rewritten for a new generation. But the core ideas, the underlying anxieties and aspirations, they remain remarkably consistent.
It's like we're still drawn to those same fundamental questions. What does it mean to be human? What happens after we die? Is there something more to existence than what we can see and touch?
Yeah.
And maybe, just maybe, can we tap into a power beyond our own limitations?
And who knows, maybe exploring these stories, these myths, can help us find some answers, or at least lead us to ask better questions.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to bring our deep dive into the world of Chinese fox immortals to a close. But before we go, I want to leave our listeners with a challenge.
If you're intrigued by what we've uncovered today, if you're curious about the hidden meanings and the enduring power of folklore, then I encourage you to do a little exploring of your own. Pick up a book on mythology, watch a documentary about ancient cultures, or even just start asking questions about the stories you grew up with.
There's a whole world of folklore out there, just waiting to be discovered. And who knows what amazing insights, what unexpected connections, what mind-blowing revelations you might uncover along the way. So go forth, intrepid listeners, and embrace the power of storytelling. I have a feeling this conversation's only just scratched the surface. Like there's so much more to explore when it comes to Chinese folklore.
Oh, there really is. We've
Yeah.
kind of opened a door to this vast universe of stories and symbols, you know? And these stories, they weren't just for entertainment. They helped people make sense of the world.
Right, like grapple with those big questions about life and death
Yeah.
and what it all means.
Exactly. It's like each story is a piece of a puzzle. And when you start putting them together, you see this bigger picture emerge, a picture of a culture, a way of thinking about the universe that's both familiar and totally strange.
So true. And, you don't have to be an expert in Chinese history to appreciate these stories.
No, not at all. They tap into something universal.
They really do.
These stories are about believing in something bigger, the allure of the unknown, the struggle between good and evil, and trying to find meaning in a world that can feel so chaotic.
It's like looking through a window into a different time and place, but also seeing our own hopes and fears reflected back at us. It makes you realize that these stories, these myths, they weren't just made up out of nowhere.
Yeah, they were shaped by real-life experiences, social structures, the everyday challenges and triumphs that people faced.
And they keep evolving. Think about how shape-shifting immortality's supernatural powers. All these themes show up in modern fantasy.
Absolutely. In novels, movies, video games, it's like these ancient stories are being rewritten for a new generation.
Yeah,
But those core ideas, the underlying anxieties and aspirations, they haven't really changed that much.
it's fascinating. It's like we're still asking those same big questions. What does it mean to be human? What happens after we die? There's something more to existence than what we see. And maybe, can we access a power beyond our own limits?
Maybe exploring these stories, these myths can help us find some answers, or at least ask better questions.
I like that. So on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into Chinese fox immortals. But before we go, I want to leave our listeners with a challenge.
If you're curious about what we've uncovered today, about the hidden meanings and the power of folklore, I encourage you to do some exploring yourself. Pick up a book on mythology, watch a documentary about ancient cultures.
Or even just start asking questions about the stories you grew up with.
There's a whole world of folklore out there waiting to be discovered. You never know what amazing insights, what unexpected connections, what mind-blowing revelations you might find.
So go forth, intrepid listeners. Embrace the power of storytelling.